Using diesel fuel in the winter means knowing that gelling problems can be a threat to the operation of your engines. To prevent this, you have to be proactive by treating your fuel with anti-gel before the temperatures get critically cold. But how do you know when to do that? Cold flow improvers, or anti-gels, work by acting on the paraffin waxes that drop out of the fuel as it gets colder to keep them from unduly thickening the fuel. This has the effect of lowering the effective temperature outside at which the diesel fuel will shut down the engine because of excessive gelling. Antigels only work if they're in the fuel before it starts gelling. To know when this might happen, you need to know two things: how cold it's going to be outside and what your fuel's cold weather temperatures are. How cold it's going to be outside is pretty straightforward, but what do we mean by cold weather temperatures? Diesel fuel has two temperatures that describe its cold weather gelling performance: cloud point and cold filter plug point. Start by remembering that the fuel's wax content starts dropping out as the temperature gets colder, appearing in the fuel as wax crystals. When enough of them have come out that the fuel looks a little hazy, the temperature at which that happens is the cloud point. The second temperature, cold filter plug point, is considered to be the lower temperature where enough wax can be expected to have dropped out of the fuel that it plugs the fuel filter and shuts down the engine. Now, since keeping our engines running is our biggest concern, you might think cold filter plug point is the one to focus on. But whether fuel gelling really will shut the engine down at a given temperature depends on things outside the fuel, like the kind of fuel filter the engine uses. That means cold filter plug point isn't the one you want to focus on. Instead, the cloud point of your fuel is what you really need to know. At what outside temperature is that wax going to start appearing in your fuel and start you down the road of possible equipment shutdown? Those are the two key things you really need to know to make the critical decision about when to put anti-gel in your fuel. How cold does it have to get outside to start your fuel gelling, and how cold is it going to get where you're at? But lots of people don't know what that cloud point temperature is for their fuel, which means an educated guess is needed. Most diesel fuel has a cloud point of about 20 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer and 17 degrees in the winter. Whenever you see the outside temperatures forecast to drop below this range, you can bet the wax will be dropping out of your diesel fuel. That means you want your anti-gel to be in your fuel before the temperatures fall below these marks. You also want to pay attention to any upcoming periods where the temperatures are going to stay that cold for multiple days in a row. Normally, when it gets cold but then warms back up, it gives a chance for the wax crystals to redissolve back into the fuel. But if it stays cold for multiple days in a row, the wax that comes out in the beginning can't redissolve, while more wax keeps coming out on top of it. As more and more wax joins the wax already in the fuel, that's when gelling problems really accelerate. The longer the temperature stays cold, the worse the problem gets. Knowing all this, when should you plan to treat your diesel fuel with anti-gel? The best thing to do is monitor the upcoming forecast to see what the low temperatures are projected to be for the next 2 to 4 weeks. But you're not just seeing when it's going to be colder than 20 degrees. You really want to use a 10-degree buffer above that, 30 degrees, as your sign to start treatment. Using 30 degrees as your treatment trigger will ensure you have your anti-gel in the fuel for when it starts gelling. Preventing these kinds of problems is best done by paying attention to both your fuel's condition and what's going on around you. If you assume that gelling problems can start around 20 to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, you pay attention to the upcoming temperature forecasts, and you have a quality anti-gel treatment on hand ready for use, you'll have the best chance to avoid the diesel fuel gelling problems that might beset the less prepared.